it is that hard mindset to break. It's like, hey, this sucks because I lost this many people, instead of looking at it as like, hey, I saved this many people because it was through your actions and because you.
I just thought I just had a stupid idea though. It was like, man, we're getting our asses kicked. We can do something. It's like, oh, here's an idea. Let's go counterattack. These guys got us outgunned. They've got us outnumbered. They've got the high ground. And honestly, when I came up with that idea, it was just like, well, if we're gonna die, let's kind of dictate it on our own terms. And again, that's what truly impressed me was I had those 5 guys that volunteered. Like, hey, we're gonna go do this thing. And Raz, Delaney, Danley, Miller, and Jones, like those 5 guys are like, well, we're going. And don't have to. And they're like, we'll follow you anywhere. And it's like, well, why don't those 5 guys get acknowledged for? And I mean, and I'm not saying they never got their awards or anything, but I mean, that was just so impressive to see that you could get guys that would, I mean, that was truly a token of on a personal level. I felt like I was a good leader when you get 5 guys that'll say, I'll follow you anywhere. And that did it, that came up, recaptured the ammo supply point, was able to push the enemy out of the front gate, the Shura building area. You know, that's truly special as, like I said, as a leader. That's, like I said, in the back of your mind, you're always thinking, I call it like that Braveheart moment. Like, could I ever be tied to that board as they were freaking ripping my guts out? And would I sit there and scream freedom into the face of those fuckers? Like, for me, that was those moments that day where I look back and it's like, man, that was going through the ultimate man test to say I could kind of check that block.
Even leading to it, for the people out there that don't realize even how shitty that fighting position was, and then you guys ran drills in your head where you're like, if we did this, this is how we would do this. Like, which probably led to a...
For those who don't know, because we were just talking about this earlier at brunch, like just how bad that fighting position was.
No, yeah.
For people who don't.
Dude, you were in a
fish bowl.
Well,
yeah, you were just...
it was so bad. Like I said, my granddad had passed away by then, but like I said, I'm old school. I don't do social media, but I'll still write. I still pay all my bills by check and mail them.
My times have changed. So anyway, about a strategic fighting position.
So I wrote my grandma a letter home when we first got there, and it was just a simple, quick letter of, hey, Grandma, we're here, we're settled in, the guys' morale is high, everyone's looking good, we got 12 months here, and we'll be home soon. This place is so gorgeous. It reminds me of growing up in the Sierra Nevada mountains. Every morning I get to look up and see these beautiful mountains. And I sent that letter off, and a couple of weeks later, Grandma sent me a letter back that just said, what the hell are you doing looking up? Everybody knows you take the high ground. Like,
Grandma even
Graham knew. Like, that was not the most ideal location. I mean, you just sat at the very bottom of that valley, surrounded by mountains on all sides. Every time we'd go out and do patrols and stuff, you'd get just 100 meters up on the hillside, and you'd look down, and you were like, man, I can see everything. I can see LRAS too. I can see the front gate. This is a badass fighting position. I can just bail over the back here. You'd never be able to shoot me. You'd go freaking 20 feet the next direction. It's like, oh, this is even better.
Bring it up, Jamie. Bring it up right here on the screen.
Thanks, Jamie.
Thanks, Jamie. This is how ridiculous this fighting position is that you're looking at right now.
They did not consult Obi-Wan Kenobi.
It's over, Anakin! I have the high ground!
No. Take the high ground.
Anakin, come on.
Anakin.
Come on.
The worst positioning possible. Imagine a fishbowl, and the bottom of that fishbowl is where you guys are based out of. And it's a cob, right?
Yep. So the only way in and out was by helicopter at that point. And oh, by the way,
I did not know that. Holy
yep,
what?
The road? Well, that's how the outpost got named, was by Lieutenant Ben Keating. They were trying to move, I believe it was the LMTV, back to Fa Bostic. Rolled over and killed Lieutenant Ben Keating, giving the name to the outpost. And that road was no longer serviceable logistically for the U.S. Army. Taliban had taken it over. It had been too narrow. It was just too treacherous. So helicopter was the only way in and out. And oh, by the way, our landing zone was outside of our perimeter, and it was in between 2 rivers that converged together. And so you kind of had to land in this peninsula.
So leading up to like everything, you were getting popped off like once a
Yeah, about once a day. And like I said, every day was a little bit different, but typically it would be about 6 o'clock in the morning. We ended up calling that kind of our Taliban alarm clock. Some days it would just be a couple of rounds of AK fire. Just
I like Brandon's like,
you gotta have terms for everything.
and that's a great
Hell of a
term.
phrase, yeah.
And it's called something else over there.
And then, I mean, sometimes they'd hit you with the little sporadic AK fire on the east, and then all of a sudden, RPGs, mortars, B-10 hitting you on the west. Like every day was something. Not every day was too intense, but it could be. And in fact, we found out right away it was actually better to be outside the wire on patrol than it was to be down in the outpost. We only took 2 engagements, direct fire engagements, outside of the wire the 3 months we were there. They didn't want to fuck with us if we were actually out on patrol moving around and stuff. So we always loved being on patrol week because then you could kind of set the tempo and try to go after them. But yet, when you're only sitting there with 18 guys, we were very limited on how far they would let us patrol. And everything was straight up the frickin' mountainside. So even though like the village of Kamdesh as a crow flew on the map was like a kilometer and a half, to actually navigate the terrain ended up being almost 9 kilometers. One of those things, when things go bad, it's not just because 1 or 2 things happen, it's a multitude of things. And Bunderman, who was my lieutenant, so he was a senior officer for us on Combat Outpost Keating at the time. And because we had leave and stuff and guys rotating through, it's just the way it happened to be. And the day before, Stoney Portis, our new commander, had just gotten there. He was taking over the troop. He is doing sensitive item inventories, goes up to OP Fritchie. Helicopter gets shot at. They won't bring him back to us. He calls up Bunderman the night before, and he's like, hey, you've got the outpost until I get back in about a day or so. And then 6 o'clock in the morning, the next day, that's when Bunderman all of a sudden he's the commander. Like I said, he'd been in for, we had the advantage that we worked together in that train up going to Afghanistan for almost a year, which was pretty rare to have an officer that long, especially in a platoon leader position. But, it's one of those things you don't think you're going to be that guy until you're that guy, and Bunderman ended up being our guy. And I'll tell you, to this day, I wouldn't have anybody else in that tactical operations center besides him. I mean, it came to the point at one time I remember going in, and he's sitting there and he's got like this book, and he's reading this book, and of course I'm like, hey sir, what the fuck you doing reading a book? We're kind of getting shot at right now, you dumb lieutenant. And as he looks up, I can see he's reading the Army's call for fire manual. And he's like, hey, I'm about to start bringing 500 pounders 100 meters away from our position. There's like a good 90% chance, because of sitting in that bowl, it'll probably land on us. And I just remember looking at it, and I'm like, I'd rather it be our bombs than theirs. And he's like, okay. And him and Schroed started calling in 500 pounders, dropping them 100 meters away, because they also knew that the Taliban was trying to get in tight on us, and typically coalition forces wouldn't call for artillery or indirect fire on yourself. But because of them doing that, it gave us just enough breathing room. They couldn't continue to kind of tighten that noose around us. And it was that risk versus reward. And I know, like, what a pair of balls you got to do something like that. And Bunderman had those balls, big brass ones that he'd bang them together in stormy weather and
make that sound. That is a good, and it's a butter bar at that time.
No, he'd been promoted to first lieutenant by then.
First lieutenant. So in the military for a year. So this is for reference. You have been in college for 4 years, and then you are in service 1 year. And now you are doing that kind of level of call where you're like, hey, your NCOs are telling you, it's like, what the fuck are you doing? Because a lot of officers, even captains, you're listening to your NCO. You're listening to your higher enlisted, and you're like, hey, like, what should I do right now? And for him to be like, I'm calling for fire for JDAMs, I'm assuming. Yeah. On my in 100.
At 100 yards.
Yeah.
Yep.
Is wild.
those we've talked about on the podcast, like we'd be in the Streckers, like call for fire. We'd call JDAMs in to drop bombs on like bridges or houses, and we'd all stand up like 500 yards away and be like, "Oh wow!"
You just feel that.
Yeah. And you guys were like, "Yo, don't worry, you don't have to look. You're gonna see wherever this bitch lands."
So he was so ballsy that he might have, because we'd gotten our radios taken out. They knocked out our generators, so our FM comms didn't exist anymore. So we were talking most of the day on TACSAT, and of course, anybody in the world that's tuned into TACSAT can listen in. And in fact, a lot of our former buddies and rear detachment guys back at Fort Carson were hearing all the radio transmissions live and in real time back at Fort Carson, because the only link we had for help was on the Afghanistan's tactical satellite frequency.
Shit.
Yeah, so Bunderman's talking on that, and he might have said, allegedly, shake and bake the village of Armul. And he brought in a B-1 bomber, as we discovered that Larson and Carter were still alive with Mace. He brought in a B-1 bomber to give some bomb support and coverage as they grabbed Mace to bring him back to the aid station with a B-1 that went Winchester 800 meters away from our position. And I think a B-1, the bone, carries like 26,000 pounds of munition.
They just dumped it.
They just dumped it on that village. And I'm going to caveat, that village was cleared out. The Taliban had kicked all the civilians out of there, taken that town over that morning. There were no civilians in that village. It was all enemy, but he dropped literally 26,000 pounds of bombs in the village of Armul to give Larson and Carter that freedom of maneuver to get Mace back to the aid station.
Because you got a call saying like, "Hey," because you thought you lost both, like 2 individuals, and then you got a call. It's like, "Hey, we have them still," and you're like, "What the fuck?"
Yeah, we'd been cut off. Like I said, things went from bad to worse. And at that point, when we started the counter assault, we'd been cut off from Larson, Gallegos, and those guys out to the west for like 6-7 hours at that point. Thought they were all gone. Thought the enemy had either taken their bodies or the worst was happening. And as we pushed up, got to the ammo supply point, kicked the enemy off that, opened that up to feed everybody else ammo, and then got up to the front gate area. We're sitting there kind of in a holding pattern, waiting to make our next push. When we get the call, thinking that Larson, who I'd served with on my second Iraq deployment, and like I said, me and him were, boys. Actually, I'd just seen him last week in Omaha.
What's up, bro?
Actually, I'm gonna give a highlight story. So that was October 3rd. Larson just had his youngest son, Solomon, October 3rd of this year.
Nice.
To tie back in, great things still happen coming into the future. So when he gets to look at October 3rd now, he gets to look at his son Solomon and think, look at the great things that are happening. But to caveat back, thought Larson had long been dead. Like I said, love that brother to death. Thought he was just over and done with. Hadn't heard from him in hours and hours and hours. And then I get the call on the radio. Bunderman's like, "You won't believe this, but Larson and Carter are still alive. Mace is badly wounded. If you can provide covering fire to the north, I'm going to bring in a B-1 bomber to the village of Armul to the west. And as soon as you hear the bombs drop, when they call shot over the radio, push out, provide covering fire to the north, and they'll bring Mace back." And sure as shit, we hear shot over, waiting for splash. We push out, start engaging off to the north, and bombs start hitting. It was like being in the frickin' bass drum at a Metallica concert. Like it was lifting, all those bombs hitting was just lifting that rooftop off that building. We were trying to take us kind of some cover, and then Larson and Carter come running through with Mace on a stretcher. Larson gets back to the aid station, calls me up a few minutes later, and he's like, "Hey, medics have checked me out. They say I'm good to go. Where you at and what do you need?" Like I said, this is I remember this moment so vividly after Like I said, all the other stuff that's gone on is Larson calling me up and saying, hey, where you at? What do you need? And I'm like, it's been a long day. I'm kind of thirsty and I haven't had a cigarette yet. And like 5 minutes later, here comes fucking Larson with a 12-pack of Dr. Pepper under one arm and a carton of Camel Lights in his hand. And he shows up and we give each other just a big ass hug. Open up the Dr. Peppers, crack one of those, start drinking, spark up a smoke. And it was like, okay, this is going to be, we're going to make it out of there. Like that moment, just sitting there in that Shure building. I mean, there's still shit going on. It's just like, yep. It's just going to be all right.
I don't think people understand, like the average person understands the level of ordnance you're talking about. 26,000 pounds of bombs for one. But the other that I'm still hung up on is you're talking about dropping a 500-pounder of high explosives a football field away from you.
Yeah.
That's insane to me. Like that is, there's danger close and then there's whatever the fuck that is.
Yeah. Well, so danger close, I mean, is you think about it, for every pound of explosive, you want a yard of distance. That's kind of the rule of thumb.
So you're well beyond danger close. You are well beyond danger close. Holy shit! And these are like
that's
500
like eat an
pounds.
avocado at the end of the day distance. Like
it's a very distinct taste.
Yeah,
I just like it is so military. In that midst of everything, you're just like, oh man, it's Dr. Pepper and
fucking, I just want to smoke.
Dope dog. That cherry just burning bright, and you don't give a.
It's middle of the day.
The snipers can see me. I don't give a fuck.
They haven't hit me yet. This lung cancer is gonna get me.
Same mindset across everything. When you're in that situation, like I don't give a fuck. Like, this shit.
It's like, oh, this sucks so bad. They're gonna have to drag my body back. I'm too tired to walk. Just shoot me right now.
Holy fuck, dude. That is, I mean, and then it is, how long was that actual full engagement for everything to be done before they were like, hey, because they were inside the camp at this point.
They were inside basically within the first hour.
They are inside the cob at this point. That's what's crazy is it's not like they're pushing in. They are already inside and you're having these battles inside the cob. Yeah. And how big is the cob in total you're talking about?
The whole cob was east to west was the longest, maybe about 200 meters. And then north to south was maybe about 125 to 150 meters. So not a very big space.
And they're already inside the wire at that point.
And like I said, within that first hour, they'd breached. By kind of that 2 hours, they had started burning down most of the buildings. We only owned Red Platoon Barracks, the Tactical Operations Center, and the aid station for most of the day.
You said it was like 30 or 40% was under your control. The rest was under enemy
control. They cut us off from, like I said, the mortar position out to the west. We'd lost contact with Sergeant Brading and his guys out there. Cut us off from Gallegos, breached that whole front gate. And then toward the east was where we had about 35 Afghan Army guys. And that was kind of their side of the base. First contact, most of those guys just dropped their weapons and walked away. So left that whole east, and that's where the first breach came through, was the whole eastern side. They just walked on through because there was no one there to defend it other than we had Copus, who was one of our young specialists. He ended up being the only gun left in the fight that day on a Mark 19, holding off that whole eastern side of the camp.
Damn.
He sat in that Humvee for 14, 15 hours, and most of the time by himself, just because we couldn't really normally would put someone kind of out there by him to help provide like some covering fire when he was reloading. But in the position you had to normally you could get away with putting him in was so triangulated and surrounded. Anybody outside of that up armored Humvee was going to get blasted. Copus at least had the advantage of and I use that term loosely, advantage of being in that up armored Humvee, setting down low enough they just couldn't quite shoot over the kind of side rails of the turret to kind of finish him off if they had the chance. And like I said, he sat there for 14 hours, lost radio comms 3 or 4 times. He thought he was the only person still alive on the outpost for a few hours. And
Jesus.
like I said, no one would have ever blamed him for being like, well, fuck you guys, I'm going home. Let me sneak back to go find someone else still alive or someone to talk to me or anything. He literally sat there just slinging rounds all day.
And then at what point, because you also took it was an RPG shrapnel, or
Yep.
what hit you? And then it was in your arm,
Yeah, the right side. So it came to a point, like I said, things were going from bad to worse. Still had contact with Gallegos and Larson and them out toward the west on that LRAS 2. Larson had already gotten the 50 cal blown out of his hands by an RPG, no longer operable. The 240 that was out there that supported 2 had long ran out of ammo, and basically those 5 guys were just in that Humvee kind of holding on. So myself and Specialist Gregory had a machine gun, Mark 48, and we were able to sneak over and look out toward the west. And we only had about 200 rounds because, like I said, we'd already been cut off from the ammo supply point. This was kind of the last of the ammo we had left for that gun. And threw that up on the 60K generator and had Gregory feeding the gun for me. And I remember just looking out, and this is probably like the first 30 to 45 minutes into the fight at this point, and looking out toward the west, and I mean, you could just see they're like ants coming down the hill. And at that time, I'm sitting there and trying to call Gallegos and them. Still got FM comms, and it's like, hey, you guys need to move. You can move now, providing covering fire. And Gallegos is just coming back, and he's like, brother, you can't bring enough fire. Like, we need close air support. We need mortar rounds. We need more than just one machine gun.
If just for reference, sorry to interrupt, but if like, what's the rough, like the count of enemies at that point? Like, how many dudes are you guys going up against
versus yourself?
At that point, I mean,
the ratio, I guess.
It would have been just thinking of the targets. I mean, there had to have been over 50 on that west side going against, our one machine gun, but they got the high ground, they got cover. I know after everything was all said and done, they said it was probably about 400 fighters that hit us that day.
And then what was your total capacity on the base?
We were sitting at 50 Americans and 2 Latvians.
That's what's insane. You have like that many, and it's not. This is firearms and people that are used to fighting in that terrain.
Well, and I mean, those guys, those weren't like you're just, hey, let me grab an AK and show up today and
squirters. They're not squirters.
Yeah, they're sitting there and they're fixing you, and you can see them try to flank your left. They're flanking because that's what ended up happening is we're engaging out toward the west, trying to get Gallegos and them to move. Didn't realize that they'd breached that front gate just off to our right, and they snuck in an RPG team just to our right, maybe 30 yards away.
Holy shit.
And luckily that RPG was made on a Friday or something at the end of work. Because they touch it off and it comes in just a little low, and the generator takes most of the blast. So blows me over onto Gregory. We kind of fall down. Remember grabbing him, kind of picking him up, dusting him off. Hey, are you good? He can still move and stuff. And told him, just take off running, bud. And I grabbed the machine gun, threw it back up on what was left of the generator, took care of the problem to the north, out by the front gate. He takes off. I throw in the last 100 rounds we got. I just remember calling back to Gregory, and I'm like, brother, you guys have got to move, and you got to move now. I cannot hold this position. I'm almost out of ammo, and I'm just sitting there just trying to lay it down as hard as I can. And the guy goes just calling back, and he's like, brother, we can't go anywhere. They got us pinned too hard. I mean, they were just getting pounded from every which way. Like I said, I just remember his last little little bit of ammo comes through that feed tray cover, and give him the last call. And it's like, if you don't leave now, if you don't move now, you've got to move now. And he just calls back, and he just gives a simple, well, be here when you get here, brother. Like, he just kind of knew that that was going to be what it was. And it was just shitty, because it's like, man, if these roles were reversed, I knew this motherfucker was coming to get me. And I just felt like I abandoned him at that point, because it's like, I always had a good mindset of, I used to tell my guys, like, dead bodies attract more dead bodies. I don't want you coming out and try to save someone. Kill the enemy first. Because if you don't kill them and eliminate the threat, if you go out there in a blaze of glory, well, let me go help my buddy that's down, you're just going to be the next guy down. So kill the enemy first. As much as it sucks to sit there and listen to your buddy say, hey, help me, come save me, it makes no tactical sense to do that until you've eliminated the threat. And at that point, I knew I wasn't going to go run across 200 meters to go, or 150 meters to go find Gallegos and try to drag them back. It was just like, I don't have a machine gun anymore. My position's compromised, and I'm going to go displace back and figure something else out. But just to hear him say, we'll be here when you get here, gave me that reassurance that he knew I would eventually, if I could still do it, come back to get him.
That's the hard part of leadership. It's that making the right call, because you have to say it is the hardest part of leadership, is that single moment where, thank God, a lot of people do not have to go through it. Is the hard choice. It's like, hey, you want to, no matter what. It's like, hey, I want to do this. It's just strategically the worst option, and that's where you have to you have to bite that bullet and live with it, but understand it is the right choice at the end of the day.
There's, as I used to say, like, there's no right choices sometimes, but even a bad choice is better than no choice. Like, to make no decision, to make no kind of decisive movement will get you killed every time, where at least a bad choice or a bad decision, you can hopefully learn from that, but at least you're doing something to make a difference. And I mean, Butterman, again, going back to him, when he had to make that call of Alamo position, he knew he was going to be isolating like 9 guys. When he made that call, it's like, anybody that can hear this, you get back to these 3 buildings and we'll hold these. But if you don't get back, I'm sorry, we can't send anybody out. We're literally cutting off the mortar position. We're cutting off LRAS 2. Like, you've got to get back. And if he wouldn't have made that call, and I know that weighs heavily, like you said, on a leader, to sit there and be like, do I continue to try to fight this kind of broken shamble of stuff, or do I make that call to say, hey, if you can make it back, you make it back. If you don't, you don't. But at least the guys I get back, I can figure out where to go with them next.
That's where the right call is still objectively shitty.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, there's no right call, but you got to make a call.
Yeah.